Hello, readers and writers. I'm MJ, and today we are talking to an editor. Today, I am extremely happy to have Rebecca Scharpf with us today, who runs Scrollwork's Edits and specializes in working with indie authors, writing fantasy, science fiction, and romance, and works most closely with queer and neurodivergent authors, and is my copy editor for Lucas, and an editor who I have enjoyed working with. So welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Hello, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So I'm really excited to get a chance to talk to you and have you share your wisdom with other indie authors about working with editors and what they can do. So I guess just to start off, how did you start working as an editor?
Yeah, so I was always interested in writing. So that's where I started. I did a lot of writing, got an English degree. And then, due to disabilities and neurodivergence, I realized that a traditional job was just not going to be fitting my needs. I needed something more flexible. I needed something work from home. And I was already really interested in grammar and story structure. So I thought, maybe being an editor would be a great way to have an income, still allow me to do my writing, still be in the same industry. And so from there, I went on and took a couple of editing courses, started getting my feet wet, and then kind of built it up from there. So it was kind of this mix of something I was passionate about, but also something that I kind of needed.
That is fantastic. I have an observation that may or may not be true, but I think for neurodiverse people, there tends to be two tracks: ones that are really great at editing, and those like me that are really bad at it. And I think it's fantastic that when we can come together and build off each other's strengths to make something that is amazing. Um,
Yeah.
so speaking more about editors, there are different types of editors. And can you tell us a little bit more about the different types and how you would utilize those editing services?
Yeah, so there are four primary types, and then there's a couple of like spin-offs, I guess. So the four main types are the developmental editing, line editing, copy editing, and proofreading. Some editors, like myself, also offer manuscript evaluations. Other editors might offer like professional beta reads. So you always want to start with the big picture. So looking at things like character arcs, pacing, plot, settings, kind of the big picture stuff, and that would be a manuscript evaluation or a developmental edit. And to help you know what you need, a manuscript evaluation just goes a little bit less in depth than a developmental edit. So I always tell authors that if you feel like your story is pretty solid and you just want to catch anything that might have slipped through, like any plot holes or anything that could just, be tweaked, go with a manuscript evaluation. If you are feeling like the plot's a little bit shaky, some of the scenes aren't quite coming together, you're not sure that you like the ending, something like that, go with a developmental edit because it's going to be a lot more in depth. Once you're done with that, then you can move to the next phase, which is the line editing phase. And that is where we look at sentence structure. So we will do some rewrites for clarity, for flow. That's where you're going to see changes like changing passive voice to active voice, taking out filter words, or condensing, like maybe you have 5 words, but if you could replace it with 1 word that kind of is more powerful and gets it across. A good editor will try to keep those rewrites to a minimal and always make sure it stays in the author's voice, so be looking for that. But that is great for if an author is just having trouble getting the sentences to really come together, or maybe they're struggling with passive voice or with being really descriptive or concrete. And it doesn't really look at grammar. That's the next step. So the next step would be copy editing. So once the sentences are all the way that you like them, then you can get into copy editing, which looks at grammar, punctuation, spelling, but also checks for consistency. So making sure the character's hair color stays the same, a one-story building doesn't become a two-story building later on, and a copy editor will record all of that information into a separate style sheet so that you can refer back to it in future books in the series or give it to your proofreader, just to make sure that consistency stays the same across the board. And then very last, you're going to do the proofread, which is kind of the last quality control check. So it's going to catch anything that a copy editor might have missed. So things like, again, grammar, spelling, punctuation. If you have a style sheet or like a list of, fantasy words for your fantasy novel, it will go and make sure that those are all consistent. And it will flag any last formatting issues, if there's any issue with the chapter headings, the line spacing, things like that. So that's the final step. And that's all the steps.
So I've never even heard of a manuscript like evaluation before. I think that's fantastic. How do you think that like compares with beta readers?
Yeah, so manuscript evaluation. So if we're looking at how in-depth it goes, I would say beta reader is very surface level and is looking more from the reader perspective. Manuscript evaluation is going to go a bit deeper. You're going to get a separate report with it. And it's going to be looking at it from an editor perspective rather than a reader perspective. And so it's going to give you some tips on how to fix things, where potential issues might lie. It'll have more of a breakdown for you. And then the developmental edit is like hardcore, in-depth, expansive, report, things like that. So it's just different levels of depth and getting it from an editor perspective rather than kind of like reader initial thoughts.
That's fantastic. Also, I had another question and then it just kind of slipped through my brain, which is exactly how my brain works.
How my brain works.
So I have heard that it's best to have a different like copy editor and a proofreader. Do you agree with that? Or
yeah, so you can have the same, but it's nice to have a fresh set of eyes on it, and sometimes they'll catch slightly different things. The one thing to keep in mind is that some copy editing changes are a little bit more subjective. So commas, I know we all love commas, sarcasm there, but commas, some of them are fixed and some of them are subjective, which is fun. So if your copy editor makes decisions on commas one way and your proofreader makes decisions a different way, you just need to have that confidence in yourself as an author to make that final choice for yourself. But I do think it's nice having a fresh pair of eyes on it just because they will pick up on different patterns, catch different things. They might have different training and background. So I do think, that's what I generally recommend, is to have a different proofreader from your copy editor if you can.
That actually is a great example because that is exactly what happened with Lucas. Definitely a lot of differences in how commas should be placed. And then again, just me making that executive decision of where they're going to go in the final copy. Exactly. Also, with the sheet that you provide back on the books is absolutely fantastic. I just have to say that. So this is the first time I have had the confidence to write a series. I started with standalones because that's what I knew I could start doing. And to have that sheet to then bring into all of my other books has been fantastic. I've shared it with beta readers. I've shared it with my proofreader. So I just wanted to share that's a great service. Perfect. All right. So you specifically, what type of editing services do you provide?
Yeah, so the ones that I just listed are also the ones that I provide. I started with proofreading, copy editing, and then built up from there. I used to provide professional beta reading, which just goes a little bit more in, how some beta readers might be like, oh, I loved it, or oh, I hated it. And so it's a little bit more structured. But I decided to just focus on kind of actual editing stuff. So I don't provide that one anymore, but all the ones I just talked about, I now offer.
I will say I love when readers will beta read for me. I love getting their perspectives. But some of the most concrete feedback I get back is from other writers. So it's not quite editing, like editor level feedback, but it's definitely someone who has experience in trying to put a storyline together. And so they know where I like might be falling short, or where to provide a little bit more concrete feedback. So
Absolutely.
and still love readers who beta read, but they should feel free to give more concrete feedback as well.
Yeah, and something that sometimes helps with that with beta readers who are readers is providing them like a little like one-page questionnaire can sometimes be helpful to kind of get more concrete answers. Like, hey, what was the strongest part? What part was the most confusing? Or, you know, however. But yeah, it's different ways of seeing the manuscript and different experience levels for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what should an author look for, and what questions should they ask when they're looking for an editor?
Yeah, so this is a topic that I'm really passionate about. There are a lot of really great editors out there, but there are some that haven't really gone through the appropriate training and the appropriate channels in order to offer editing services. And so it's getting a little bit tricky for authors to tell the difference. So one of the questions to ask just right off the bat would be, what type of training do you have? Having an English degree, being an English teacher, being an author, those are not enough to teach someone how to edit. It's related, but it's a very different skill. It's kind of like working in a restaurant. Like if you're a server, you know a little bit of what's going on in the kitchen, but you can't just cook. So asking what training that they have done would be a great way to start. You can also ask for testimonials. I will say the thing with testimonials is that they're usually handpicked by the editor. So there is going to be some bias, but it might give you an idea of, you know, if you see 3 testimonials that all say, oh, this report was like very in depth, you know, it'll give you a clue of what to expect. Always ask for a sample edit to make sure that you mesh well with the editor, that you're understanding the feedback. That also gives you an idea of, you know, how does the editor communicate with you? Do they keep you updated? Do you feel comfortable with them? Let me see what else here. You can ask them like how long they've been professionally editing. Sometimes you can ask them what books they've worked on. Ask them if they are familiar with your genre and your subgenre that you're writing in, especially for things like developmental edit. For a proofread, it's probably not that vital, but for developmental edit, for copy edit, it's really helpful. Like that's one of the reasons I don't really work with historical fiction, is because I don't feel qualified to verify historical information. So yeah, just make sure that they're a really good fit. Ask about budget. Ask if they are available in your time frame. Ask how they work, and ask how many passes they do through a manuscript. One pass through a manuscript generally is not enough. Maybe for a proofread if they have a style sheet and it's been through a copy editor already. Some editors do one pass for a manuscript evaluation as well, but for a developmental edit, copy edit, line edit, should be 2 passes through. So those are some great questions to ask to kind of give you a good picture of how experienced an editor is.
I think fit is so important in editors. I've worked with some amazing editors that weren't necessarily a great fit for what I was writing,
Right.
especially writing autistic fiction. It was really hard for me to find a neurodiverse editor, which is one of the reasons why I really wanted to start working with you, because I was getting feedback like, my autistic nephew wouldn't do this, and I'm writing about an adult. Right. And it's just like, it's like it was well intentioned and I was getting
Right,
good other feedback, but it wasn't getting at the heart of the characters. And there's just, being autistic, how we process, or neurodiverse in general, how we process is just different. And so I do think it's important to have like neurotypical readers read through my books to make sure that I'm translating it, but to have an editor who actually understands where I'm coming from to call me out where it should be called out. But then also having queer characters in there also. So I've worked with editors that
absolutely.
may have been less comfortable with that,
Well,
or like when I write books with they them pronouns, that's less comfortable with that as well.
yeah.
So yeah, so for me, I've been on like a journey. I mean, I've just published my fourth book, and I've worked with quite a few different editors. Not that they did bad work; they did great work. It's just I knew in my next project they weren't going to be the best
Right.
fit until, I mean, I found you, which
Oh,
hopefully
thank
it
you.
will be a lasting relationship. Well,
Aw.
that sounded weird, but you know what I mean.
No,
Um,
exactly, exactly.
so yeah, I think fit is really, really important.
Absolutely.
Not just skill. And you may not find that right away, especially as a new author.
Absolutely.
Um, all right. So what can authors do to make your job easier?
Ooh. So one of the big things is to make sure that you do your self edits before contacting an editor. And you can keep it appropriate to the level. So if you're doing like a developmental edit with an editor, do self edits that focus on the plot and the character arcs. Clean up maybe the punctuation and grammar a little bit just to make it easier for the editor to read, but you don't need to go hardcore. But do a few rounds of self-editing first, because the more self-editing you can do, the more your editor can like really focus on fine-tuning and elevating rather than kind of groundwork stuff. The other big thing is to kind of know what you're looking for. So even if you're not familiar with the different names for the editing types, just knowing things like, hey, I'm worried about my sentence structure and I need help with that. Or I'm worried about this character arc and I need help with that. Or, hey, I don't know what to do with commas and semicolons. Can you help with that? That helps us narrow it down so that we can recommend which sample edit might be the best fit. And then also knowing things like what is your budget, what is your time frame. It's also important, I think, for authors to realize how far in advance to book an edit. A lot of editors are booked out 4 to 6 months in advance. And so it is difficult. I think that's one of the main reasons I have to turn clients away is when they want an edit like next month. And I have to be like, well, would 5 months from now work? And so just being mindful of time frame. But yeah, just kind of having an idea of what you want, what your parameters are, what you're looking for. Again, even if you don't know the terminology, just having an idea is helpful.
That sounds fantastic. And I would assume things that writers should be doing anyways, although maybe not all of them are. Um, so, what advice do you have for authors who are self funding their books and may not have much money to spend on editing?
Yeah, so this is a very important topic, especially for indie authors. And especially for like disabled indie authors, any marginalized community, unfortunately, will often have less access to funds. And I always say, publish your book anyway, but don't break the bank just because of imposter syndrome. So for editing, one thing that's helpful, so for traditional editing, right, they go through all the different editing stages. For indie authors, I recommend focusing on the 1 or 2 types of editing that you most need and don't spend your money on the rest. So if you know that you struggle the most with your story, get a developmental editor or a manuscript evaluation if that's what you can afford. If you are really struggling with punctuation, get a copy edit, kind of determine what you need the most help with. And if you're not sure, have an editor look at a sample and they might be able to help you with that. Another thing is leaning on your community. So things like beta readers, ARC readers, critique partners, so other authors that can review your work and give you feedback. A lot of indie authors either do their own proofreads or have an author friend proofread to save money on proofreading and just do that final check. So it's a lot of kind of what you need the most help with, focus on that, leave the rest. A lot of editors also offer payment plans. So I know it can be sometimes embarrassing to ask about money related stuff, but don't be afraid to ask like, hey, do you have a payment plan? What does that look like? Don't be afraid to look for an editor within your budget. There are some editors, for example, who are newer to the field and their rates are lower as they're gaining experience. That might be a great way to start off. And then, you know, there are always ways to increase your own skills as well that are less costly. So things like YouTube videos on story structure, or books, like maybe there's a $12 book on self-editing. Or you could get maybe the ebook version for cheaper. So look for those as well to fill in any gaps in knowledge. But yeah, you know, we're all on budgets. The economy sucks. So don't be ashamed of working within your budget and really sticking to that budget. You know, you don't want to go broke or go into debt over your book, but you should still put your book out there.
It's so easy to go into debt over publishing your book.
Oh yeah.
When I first wrote In Between, my debut novel, I got all the editors, and it's and then had to proofread it. Had to do another proofread, or because my first proofreader didn't do a great job. So it was very expensive, but I learned a lot from it. And part of that is learning my strengths. Is that my strengths are not in editing. It's definitely more in the plot development and plot holes. And like, I'm the person that reads the books and can point out every inconsistency in it. And so for me, usually beta readers can handle that. Like, so that's, I do not use developmental editors anymore. I use beta readers that can kind of point out some inconsistencies and then move forward with that, just because you're right. You have to choose where you're going to cut costs. But I do then have a copy editor and a proofreader, because I know that those are my biggest weakness and always will be. But I've gotten better at them as time has moved on. So that's nice. But yeah, also I will just say that in order to help fund my books, I mean, I do work another job, which does help fund them as well. But then I also have side gigs where I sell used books and I sell stuff on Etsy, and so kind of self fundraise, because I don't think a lot of indie authors do actually, like, at most we're working on breaking even, unfortunately, until we get further along in our writing career.
Absolutely.
And there's some that happened, but actually I learned to one of the webinars I went to is like, don't compare your middle to someone's end, or don't compare your beginning to somebody's middle. So
100%.
And that helps with imposter syndrome, what you brought up.
Well. I heard once that I don't know where they got the statistic from, but something like the average indie author starts making profit between book 3 and 12. So there is going to be a lot of, wow, I'm not getting a return. But, you know, if you've got a few books out, you know, then it's sucky, but it's kind of part of the indie author process, is building your backlist, building your fan base. So there's a lot of imposter syndrome, but some of it is just the industry.
Well, and it's connecting with your authors, or your readers, sorry. And that's going to really depend on who your readers are. So if you are a mainstream romance author, your readers are right there in, like, all over books spaces. But if you are a neurodiverse writer, the readers are out there. Like, it just, like, over the years, I've finally started connecting with.
Right.
And so it's building that up and finding the people and then connecting them to your books. So
absolutely.
Which is even harder when you're not a very social person.
Tell me about it. Same.
All right. So what type of books do you edit for? And are there any projects that you will not accept?
Ooh, so I mainly work on novels and novellas, mainly in fiction. So fantasy, sci-fi, and romance are my big specialties. Obviously, working with queer and neurodivergent authors and characters is also a specialty. I have some experience in mysteries as well. And for the rest of the genres, A lot of the ones that I don't work with are just ones that I'm not as experienced in. So things like literary fiction, historical fiction, um, nonfiction. I have a little experience there, but don't ask me to edit a bibliography because that's not my jam. I also don't really work with a lot of religious fiction just because of my background. I don't have a lot of triggers, but I generally will not work with thrillers because they can be too triggering. Horror is very dependent. Dark fantasy, dark romance is very dependent on the specific triggers and like the stories. But yeah, but I mainly stick to fantasy, sci-fi, and romance, and those are pretty broad genres with lots of different subgenres. But if anyone is ever in doubt, they just need to ask, and I can review and see if a book is a good fit or not. But yeah, those are kind of my main areas of expertise.
And that kind of brings up a good point that editors or readers also, like, they're reading through the manuscripts and just making sure that you are transparent as an author with your triggers
Yeah.
when you are submitting towards editors, because you don't want to trigger an editor. So
Yeah. And I've seen editors that took on a project and then had to cancel it because trigger warnings were not properly disclosed. So yeah, that's definitely something when you reach out to an editor, just be mindful that they're a human being, they have a history, and just as a courtesy, let them know.
yeah, I think what you have problems with is what I have problems with reading. A lot of very similar there. Do you have any advice for do you have any advice specifically for neurodiverse and autistic authors? We are both, neurodiverse, as a writer, as an editor, and there's not a lot of advice specifically for us in the writing community. So do you have any wisdom you would like to impart?
Yeah. So the first thing I'll say is that, like you said, most self-help books, whether they're for writing, whether they're in general, are not geared toward disabled people or neurodivergent people. So one of the places to start is just question everything, question all the advice that you're given. So for example, for me, the advice write every day does not work because it triggers my PDA. So part of being autistic is that if you make a demand on me, that will be hard for me to follow through because I value my independence. So write every day feels like a command, which means I'm not going to want to do it. But also the ADHD side of me gets very bored and works best in cycles. And so it's learning, okay, what works best for me? And if you're pushing and something isn't clicking, just stop and try it a different way, rather than following all the shoulds. So for example, you'll hear things like you should write a messy first draft and just get it on the page. My autistic side can't do that. It has to be organized. It has to be neat. But I've heard from authors with ADHD that they like to write out of order sometimes and jump around, which my brain could never, but but that's what I mean. A lot of this advice that people try to frame as being objective is actually very subjective. And also, if you're neurodivergent and autistic, you're probably going to be struggling a lot with fatigue. So try to work at different hours of the day, like work when you're more energized and more excited. Incorporate more rest than maybe the self-help books are telling you to, because you're probably going to need 2 or 3 times the amount. And yeah, just be very kind with yourself. For me, sometimes if I'm doing something and like my ADHD brain is having trouble focusing, or I just feel really fatigued, but I know that I have like a project that's due or a deadline coming up, I'll give myself little rewards along the way. And for me, it's not about like bribing myself to do something. It's about acknowledging this is hard. You're doing more than a non-disabled person is doing. So have a chocolate, or have, watch a YouTube video about your special interest, or, find ways to kind of make it fun and reward yourself rather than being like this taskmaster who has to be disciplined and, do this a certain way. So yeah, question all the rules because they probably don't apply.
I think a very important point. I mean, they're all very important points you brought up, but I think one of them is that you can change it up. Like, if it's not working, try something else. And I think specifically something can be working for a neurodiverse person very well, and then all of a sudden it's just not. And you don't necessarily even need to find the reason why it just stopped working.
Yeah.
It just stopped working. So that's fine to stop it and move on to something else that is going to work for you. And I've done that many different times. And it also will depend on where I am in a book and how much I have unrealistically planned out a schedule for things and still have to like crash right. But yeah, so it's going to depend on where you are, what your goal is, and all of that. I specifically have like a time goal. So every day I'm supposed to do like an hour, because after more than an hour, I like there's just more than I can do on top of all the other demands I have. But I don't usually do them an hour a day. So I just kind of stack it and then do it at some point during the week because I have a hard time transitioning. Or sometimes my day job will leave me just so fatigued that I can't write that day.
Yeah.
So I'll stack them up and then do that. And then at the end of the week, if I don't get that goal done, then I just forgive myself and say, okay, well, how am I going to do it next week? Because if you just keep putting on top of yourself, it's never you're just going to fail. And then you're not helping anybody, especially yourself. So
yeah, I'm the queen of putting more and more stuff on top of myself, thinking it'll fix it, and it doesn't. And the moment that you stop and you take a break, then you have energy and you do it all in like 5 minutes. So take a break even when you feel like you can't. And also, yes, I do the same thing where I will get a technique, it works great. 2 or 3 months in, it just doesn't work anymore. I don't know if it's part of like the ADHD brain gets bored or I just get fatigued with it. But yeah, if your rhythms change, just let them change. It doesn't need to be this is how the next 10 years will go. You know, it's just how the week goes, how the month goes. Yeah.
I think for me specifically, being autistic, in my experience, is a lot of times we do expect ourselves to do more than we can. But not only that, then most people are doing, because we sit and see the outside perspective of people and think that's like the inside perspective. And so we're like, oh, well, if they can do that, then I can do this and this and this and this. And then we can't, because nobody can. And or very few people can, I should say. And then again, it's just setting yourself up for failure and just realizing that's but also once I get working, I tend to work faster than non-neurotypical people, or than neurotypical people, double negative there. And so it's really, to me, a lot of it is just getting started, which is why I do writing sprints on my YouTube channel, is because it forces me to sit down and write at that specific time. So I can be more flexible with the other time during the week of when I write. But that's 2 hours that I have to write and work on a project, because I've like committed myself to it.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, it's good for me. Slightly exhausting, but it's good for me. All right. Still going back on that, I do want to say, on writing styles, I have to have an outline. Like, I know there's people that can go without it and just type on a page, but I have to have a very specific outline about what I'm going to write, so that I know the story before I put the words on the page. And I think one of the reasons why I do that is this new realization, is realizing that I don't imagine things in my head like other people do, because I don't see images. I think I have to have that outline, because I can't just watch it play out in front of me. I don't know. It's just a theory. But
yeah, well, I think there's some weight to that, because I outline, but I do it all in my head and it plays like a movie. So it makes sense that if I didn't have that, yeah, I'd probably need to write it out so that I could, see it in
Right.
some sense. Yeah,
Exactly.
it's so
Yeah.
interesting.
It was the most recent realization about myself, which means that I don't think we'll ever stop finding things out.
I seriously, I'm in the same boat.
All right. So, what has been one of your most fun projects to work on and why? And of course, the answer is Lucas, but beyond Lucas.
Oh my gosh, I've had so many fun projects, and there's some I can't even talk about because they're not out yet. And I'm like, hurry up and publish. One of the ones that I hold a lot of affection for is this science fiction called Eden Weeping by Tegan. I want to say if it's the English spelling, the last name is Weissman. If it's the German, it's Weissman. And I always want to say the German because I'm from Germany. But Tegan wrote this science fiction adventure series with heavy romantic subplot, neurodivergence, and other disabilities. And that book I feel very fondly about because that was the one that kind of launched my editing career. So I had been doing like smaller projects here and there. And then this book came along, and that kind of just started this upward trajectory that allowed me to eventually quit my day job and go full time. So that was really cool. And it was also around the time when I started to realize I really wanted to keep working with queer and neurodivergent authors and their stories. So yeah, I think that book was kind of like really formative. But there, I could probably talk for an hour about all the different projects I've worked on. And lately I've been working on a lot of like autistic werewolves and vampires and all of that. And I'm like, it's kind of fun seeing the neurodivergent community take werewolves and vampires by storm. So it's been very fun, very fun.
I think I could just do my reading list based upon the books that you edit. There's one that just came out that I want to get. What was it? They, them.
Oh, they, them, wolf. Oh,
Yeah, they, them,
yes.
wolf.
Yeah. And the
So,
author is so sweet. Such a
yeah,
sweet
I
individual.
follow them on Instagram now.
Yeah. But that book was so well pieced together and just like edge of your seat. But yeah, that one's really fun. But yeah, it's interesting as well, I think, working with indie authors and queer and neurodivergent authors, because you see a lot of like new refreshing takes on things. like even in Lucas, we see that, what does it mean to be halfway through a transition and then be a vampire and be frozen, so it's just fascinating getting to explore these different themes and different takes on things and different experiences that have been missing from these genres. So yeah, it's been very interesting.
I am a big on reading indie authors. One, because I want to support fellow indie authors, but also because that's where I start seeing myself. So or traditionally published, there's a few autistic authors that have made it through, but not in relation to how many of us there are. So by reading indie authors, I really have found some of my favorite books. So I think self-publishing was a huge opening space for queer and neurodiverse voices and other underrepresented individuals in publishing also.
Absolutely. And, it makes me feel good that we're seeing more and more neurodivergent authors entering the field. Like when I read your book, Neurodiverse, like I literally cried because I have been reading since I was like 5-6 years old. And that was my first ever time seeing a character where I was like, that's me, that's literally me. And that's the first and only book I've ever cried reading in my entire life. So the books we put out there, it might take a while finding our audience, but when we do find those people, there is that ripple effect. And I think we're going to see more and more neurodivergent books and disabled books and BIPOC books becoming, I hope, more mainstream and picking up steam.
I have been writing my whole life. But when I had kids, I kind of had to focus on them because they're all disabled and required a lot of attention.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is
Absolutely.
So when my daughter became an adult and I had like time to come back to writing, I sat down with myself and had to think through what I wanted to do because, my background is in psychology. I was thinking about potentially doing nonfiction, but I have always written science fiction and fantasy, and I wanted to like bridge those two things. And so it's like, I want to see myself in books. And so that's why I write what I write. And each one of my books has a piece of me in it, even though they're not me. Like the characters are all different for me, except the immortal part of myself. Riley is probably a lot more me than any other character. But there's always I do put a piece of myself into every story. So, or like use it as therapy to deal with something.
I'm the same way.
All right. And so speaking of that, you also are an author. And can you tell us a little bit about your books?
Yeah, so I started writing before I realized I was neurodivergent. So I think it'll be interesting going forward because I want to include that representation more intentionally rather than accidentally. But the series that I currently have out right now is a Wolf Shifter series. It is written from an autistic perspective, and you do have a couple of characters who are very strongly autistically coded, which is part of what helped me realize I was autistic, because I was looking at the characters and was like, wait a minute. These characters who I wanted to, really represent me are autistic. Maybe I should look into that. But yeah, and I like to focus very much on like community dynamics. So it's fantasy, but it's not like epic fantasy where they're going on this journey to save the world. It's more like, how can we fix this issue that this one family is having, or that this one little village that we're living in is having. And I really like those little like tight-knit community dynamics. It's also interesting now that I think about it that I also write wolf shifters. Mm-hmm. It's interesting that we're drawn to them, maybe because the animals, but yeah, so that's what I'm writing at the moment, and then we'll kind of see where I go from there. I'm trying to get back into it now that my editing business is up and running, and I think I might need to take your advice and just sit down and start, because that transition back in is difficult.
It really is. Yeah, when you made that comment, I did think about your books and how they often fall perfectly in line with that. But I think maybe because the paranormal is just always slightly off kilter from, not paranormal characters. And so we can put ourselves into them a little bit more. I don't know.
And I think a lot of fantasy books, like vampires, werewolves, like in a way, those kind of are marginalized communities within their world. Mm-hmm. So I think there's an aspect that can relate to, either having to, throughout my series, a lot of the characters have to keep their identity secret from the other people in their lives. And so there's this sense of like, you've got this public facing part of yourself, you have this private part of yourself, you have this part of yourself, like a lot of vampires and werewolves are misunderstood, stereotyped, there's a lot of parallels.
Yeah, there absolutely is. I have not read your books yet, but I have them and I plan on starting them. My backlog of books is
seriously mine is through the roof. I'm trying desperately to catch up, but I'll finish reading 5 books and have 10 more on my TBR. I'm like, I don't know what to do.
Right. And it's like, so many of mine are indie authors, and it's like, I want to support everyone, but I'm like, I can't read that fast. So I have to like not read that fast because I have to write my own books also. But yeah, I'm really excited to pick it up. I know it's going to be fantastic. So
we'll see.
It absolutely will. I know it will be. I have absolutely no doubt at all. because I've worked with you. So,
Thank you.
So is there anything else that you would like to share?
Ooh. I think the last thing I'll share is that if someone is watching this or listening to this and they're neurodivergent and worried about breaking into the industry, I see more and more autistic editors coming into the field. I'm sure there are, autistic audiobook narrators and cover designers coming into the field, more and more authors, more and more communities that are neurodivergent friendly and supportive that are specifically for authors. And so I see on social media a lot of like autistic authors becoming like a little bit discouraged that it's taking a little bit longer to find their audience, or they feel like maybe they're not welcome in the industry or they don't fit in. And there is absolutely room here for more neurodivergent authors, for more autistic authors. There are communities out here. You might, need to play around and find the one that you fit in. But if anyone watching this is neurodivergent and wants to get into this field, like, please do it, because we need more books like that.
Absolutely. And for finding community, I know I have a writing group that's all neurodiverse authors that we talk. And there's other communities and spaces that have been made. So if you are looking for a space to connect, put a comment in the comments and we can reach out to you and kind of connect you to at least a network of people, but also just to talk with us, because I think we both would like to still meet more neurodiverse writers. Yes. And whether you've published or not yet, that's not really that important. I will say my audiobook narrator, who I also was very happy to find, she is neurodiverse also. So it's great because I don't know how well I work with neurotypical people because I'm me. So it is great building this community of neurotypical people behind my writing to then put out neurodiverse books. And so honestly, when I started, that was my dream, and to have that happening, it makes me very happy. And I actually will be doing an interview with her at one point also.
Oh, that's exciting. Yeah. That's awesome.
So I'm happy about that. So thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it. And what is the best way for authors to get a hold of you? I know you're pretty booked up for actual work for the next little bit, because I'm already trying to map out when I can book you, and I haven't even started my next projects.
Yeah, so I'm pretty booked out right now, but what I do is I will like book out, try to book out 1 or 2 projects for each month, and then I will add more as I get closer and can kind of see how each month is shaping up. So there'll probably be some more slots opening up for early next year. Shorter books like novellas, I can usually get in a little bit, quicker as well. So people can always reach out. The best place to find me is scrollworkedits.com. So that would be my website, or you can look up Scrollwork Edits is my handle on Instagram and Threads. I'm on Twitter as well, but not as active on there as I am on Instagram and Threads. So those are the best places to find me and get in touch. I do have a Discord that I just started as well. So again, if you're looking for community, we've got all the community options for you, and you can find the link for that on my Instagram highlights. So yeah.
And I highly suggest everyone should follow you because you give really great advice and just moral support sometimes when you are feeling like the most down. You can go read something that you've put out and be like, okay, I can keep doing this. So
thank you.
It is much appreciated. So yeah, absolutely. Go follow. And the Discord is fantastic also. So I'm happy to be a part of that also. So thank you for doing this and for everything that you have shared. And I am now going to end this. I don't know how to end an interview.
Thank you for having me.
All right. And as always, keep reading, keep writing, and until next time.